Hello everyone. So let's go into the features of WebDNACodeSparker, assuming we ever get that mod rewrite thing working so that this URL shows what's typed in the URL field as opposed to the end result of the rewrite rule. Assuming that gets worked out, then this framework is good to go. And so I wanted to demonstrate the features of it so that people would be interested in the first place and see if it's useful for them, and then dig deeper from there. But so let me just demonstrate the features. I might have to break it up in parts depending on how long it takes to record these videos. So first we're going to do MVC. This was the topic on the WebDNA talk list, which created the impulse in me to even write something. I was just going to demonstrate MVC concepts, just that alone, but then I decided to really make a really good working example, and one thing led to another, and pretty soon I had a small, nice framework. But for now, I'm just going to show the MVC portion of it. Okay, so what this means to me, anyway, is just separation of presentation code, meaning your HTML, JavaScript, CSS, from your business logic, from the real core WebDNA logic that you use to make decisions, about when to read and write data in databases, when to send emails, when to generate PDFs, reports, whatever. All the stuff that your website actually does. Even decisions to just decide what's going to be displayed. Not the actual displaying, but the actual decision making of what to display. So that's what MVC to me means, just that separation. So it's really easy to maintain the code, and it saves you a lot of head pressure when you're trying to sort it out months later. Can you go back in and you need to make changes? The specifics of MVC, that acronym, Model View Controller, and in some circles, like for example in PHP's CodeIgniter, they say that some people like to combine the model and the controller. And so they basically just have, some files for the logic and some files for the presentation, and that's it. But what it's initially set up as in CodeIgniter is to separate out the actions, the reading and writing of the data especially, interaction with databases. But I took it to mean, all actions. That wasn't just making decisions, not just logic, but specifically doing things like sending emails or reading and writing data, writing files, things like that. The actual carrying out of actions, that is in model and the model files. And for the beginners, it just means files. They're just text files, code files, just like always. But we're just classifying them as a type of code file, and it's just an abstract concept for our own brains, really. The computer doesn't care. But so some of your files will be controllers, and those are the ones that I've prepended with a C underscore in the name. Some of your files will be models, M underscore is the prefix in the name, and views, the V, that's the presentation code, like the HTML, the bulk of it anyway. That's the V underscore files. So that's what this means. And how this works in this framework that I wrote in WebDNACodeSparker, the first part is the domain, like always. And on my local computer, excuse me, this website here is being served up from my local web server on my own iMac that I used to develop from. So the domain looks a little funny. It just says localhost. And in there I've got a folder called AppleZ's, and in there I've got a folder called AppleZ's WebRoot. But normally this would just be domain.com. Whatever your domain is .com, like applez's.com. AppleZ's is just a pretend restaurant chain that I made to demonstrate this framework. So imagine that all of this is a domain, which it will be in a live production server kind of environment. And then whatever's after that is going to load the controller. Okay? So, for example, if we click this link to go look at the menu at AppleZ's, it loads this content. Which dishes, photos do you want to see? show me photos of a meal at random, or show me photos of a meal suitable for the current season. And don't, mind, this is just goofy stuff I just made up. But look what it did to the URL. When we clicked menu, it went here, showed this stuff, and it tacked on that. Okay? This part was the domain, is the domain, even though it looks like folders on the domain of localhost, but imagine this was the domain because that's the way I have it set up. I've got this instance of this framework configured so that it treats all of this as the domain. Okay, so this is what this part here is what comes after the domain, and the first URL segment decides what controller to load. So Applesea's food. Oops, my BBEdit document is right here. C Applesea's_food controller Applesea's food, and it matches. And that's why when I typed in this URL or used a link that loaded this URL, it loaded the code in this controller. Okay, so in this controller is where we do all of our business logic, all of our stuff that's not related to just spitting out HTML and JavaScript to the browser. This is before we get to the browser. This is stuff for us, for our backend, and even for just decisions about what pieces of HTML and JavaScript to spit out. Okay, the second part, the first is the controller. The second URL segment, by default, WebDNACodeSparker, the framework, I have it set up so that the second URL segment after the domain, by default, tells the controller file which method to load. Okay, and method is just, in this context, a code word for which chunk of the controller file, which section. So I'm going to just copy this word menu, copy to my clipboard, Command F in BBEdit, find menu. Here we go. Right here. See, it's a function. Function name FN stands for function underscore controller method underscore menu. So because menu is right here in the URL, it's going to cause this function to execute. And the function starts here and it goes to there. So ends on line 139, starts on line 78. In this controller file is this method, this function. Okay, so this is what fires, not this function, not this function, not this function, just this one that's highlighted, the menu one. And in here I've got a switch case. Switch controller parameter 1 is just a variable. And if there's a value of random meal in there, it's going to fire this block. And if there's a value of seasonal meal, it's going to fire this block. And if there's no value yet in the variable control param 1, then the default is going to fire. And that's what happened. Because we don't have anything else in the URL, there's no more URL segments after menu, so that this variable, control parameter 1, is not yet defined. So this default block fires. So in other words, this block right here, which shows this list, you see, unordered list, there's a link, show me photos of a meal at random, or show me photos of meals suitable for the current season. That's what this is, these two links here. This is going to fire and display this list, these choices, these navigation menu choices, anytime there's no URL segment after menu. Or if the URL segment is just, nonsense that we weren't expecting, like that. See, it loads the same controller file, this one, and the same method, which is this one, and the same case right here fires. I realize I better start in the reverse direction for the novices, because looking right away at the controllers, and it can get confusing looking at code like that when it's not your own code. So let's just do this, okay? This is our website, as we've been discussing, Applesea's, and some URL, it loads a web page. Okay, where is this? Let's look at the source code. View source. I usually use the keystroke, but I wanted to show you that. Okay, so here we go. Just like we would expect, HTML, the head section, the body, close the HTML. Okay, it's just a regular HTML document in the browser. Where is this coming from? It's coming from here, a view file. A view file is just a file, like I said, with a v tagged on it in this case. And I'm loading this one. v underscore applez's underscore end user underscore eat. It's just a silly name. I could have named it anything. And you can see there's WebDNA comment, which we can ignore. There's the doc type. There's the head section. See this stuff on the right? Just ignore that for now. Okay. Body. Just for fun, let's put Z at the very beginning of the body. Save. Reload this page. There it is, Z. Source code. There it is. Okay, so we know this is the file. The view that's loading. All right, and some of this is hard-coded, like the path to the CSS file, except it's got a dynamic part in the beginning. You know, that loads the beginning of this, the domain and the initial folders in case you have them before you're, you know, the actual changing part of the URL. So some of this is hard-coded. Body, of course, you know, blah, blah, blah. Okay, then here, this is not hard-coded. This is dynamic. This is the header. I'm including a file from a variable called view bin, and then in there's a folder called vinks, view inks, and then another view file. You can load views within views. And in this main view, we're loading this header. And if just for fun, if I comment this out, okay, and by the way, get a text editor that, if you don't have already, that color highlights your code, is to make it much easier on you. Like if you're writing WebDNA, make it so that the comments, the WebDNA comments, are a different color, so you can, you know, and visually you can see right away that this is not going to fire. In big complicated files, it saves a lot of head pressure. So anyway, I just commented out this header view, which is included in my main page view file called applez's end user eat. Reload the page, and we're missing the top portion. You see our links are gone, and the logo at the top. Put it back, reload, and it's back. So, you know, let's say a lot of your pages on your website are going to have the same header, the same footer. So you'd want to use these kind of includes. I've got another one for the footer down here. Watch the footer go away. Okay. So this is views within views. So this is, so we're tracking the source that gets loaded in the browser backwards. This is the endpoint view. Okay, but where did the view get loaded? It got loaded in the controller that was called from this part of the URL. Food. And what this controller is a big grep context with just some initialization kind of stuff. And then we've got all of our methods, which is blocks that fire depending on what comes after the controller in the URL. And that's from here all the way down here where it says end methods. That's it, all that. And then we've got our views, which is just one function. You usually won't need to bother with this function at all. And then we've got the text variable that lists the methods that are in this file, the different possible blocks that can be here, indicated here, and then, you know, caused to load up above. And then we've got this one if statement that decides which view to load. The way it does it is it loads the method, and then in the method it loads the view. So in other words, the WebDNA parser comes to this controller file, it parses down all this stuff, and all this is just like happening in memory. All this is in RAM, 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 RAM.